The flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror were supposed to mean safety, but for Sarah and her 2 children, they signaled the beginning of a nightmare. Trapped on an isolated suburban road by an officer who saw their skin color before he saw their humanity, they thought they were entirely alone. But what that officer didn't know was that the husband Sarah had just secretly speed-dialed wasn't just an ordinary civilian. He was an active duty Green Beret. He had just returned home, and he was exactly 4 minutes away. The evening had started as a celebration. Sarah Reeves gripped the leather steering wheel of her brand new SUV, a soft smile playing on her lips as she glanced in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, her 8-year-old daughter Maya was fast asleep, her small head resting against a stuffed bear. In the passenger seat sat her 16-year-old son Jackson, holding a thick envelope from the state's most prestigious STEM academy. He had been accepted into their advanced robotics summer program, a dream he had been working toward for 3 years. To celebrate, Sarah had taken them to a high-end steakhouse in the affluent, quiet neighborhood of Crestview Hills, a sprawling suburb characterized by manicured lawns, towering oak trees, and wrought-iron street lamps. It was the kind of neighborhood the Reeves family was looking to move into next spring. "I still can't believe I got in, Mom," Jackson said, tracing the gold foil seal on the envelope. "They only take 30 kids in the whole state." "Believe it, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her heart swelling with pride. "You earned every bit of it." The digital clock on the dashboard read 10:15 p.m. The streets of Crestview Hills were practically deserted, the large houses set back from the road bathed in the soft glow of security lights. Sarah turned onto Oakbridge Lane, the main thoroughfare leading back toward the highway. That was when the headlights appeared. At first it was just a set of bright halogen bulbs, tailing them at a distance. Sarah didn't think much of it maintaining the strict 35-mile-per-hour speed limit. But as she merged into the right lane, the headlights mirrored her movement. She slowed down slightly, expecting the car to pass her. It didn't. It matched her speed, lingering in her blind spot, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Jackson shifted in his seat, the rustling of his envelope suddenly loud in the quiet cabin. "Mum, that car has been following us for a mile." Sarah glanced in the side mirror. The silhouette of a police cruiser was unmistakable. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of her stomach. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't swerved. Her registration was up to date, and the dealer tags on her new car were clearly visible. "It's fine, Jack," Sarah said, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "We haven't done anything wrong. He's probably just running plates." But a few seconds later, the darkness of the cabin was violently shattered by the strobe of red and blue lights. The sharp, authoritative chirp of the police siren cut through the quiet night. Maya jolted awake in the back seat, rubbing her eyes in confusion. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Maya asked, her voice tight with sleep and fear. "No, baby. Everything is fine. Just sit still," Sarah said, taking a deep breath to steady her racing heart. She pulled the SUV smoothly onto the shoulder, parking beneath the glow of a street lamp. She shifted into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a habit ingrained in her by her father years ago. "Keep your hands visible. Turn on the dome light. Don't give them a reason to be nervous." Sarah placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Jackson, mirroring his mother's caution, placed his hands flat on his thighs. In the side mirror, Sarah watched the heavy door of the cruiser swing open. Officer Bradley Stone stepped out. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and heavy-set, moving with a slow, deliberate swagger that communicated absolute control. He rested his right hand casually over his utility belt, right near the grip of his firearm, as he approached the driver's side of the SUV. He didn't use a flashlight, stepping directly into the illumination of the street lamp overhead. "Evening." Officer Stone said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. He didn't look at Sarah immediately. Instead, he leaned down, sweeping his gaze across the pristine interior of the car, lingering on Jackson and then on the sleeping child in the back. Finally, his eyes locked onto Sarah's. There was a cold, calculating detachment in his stare. "Good evening, officer," Sarah replied evenly. Is there a problem? Stone didn't answer right away. He tapped a thick finger against the doorframe of the SUV. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Of course, Sarah said, her voice steady. My license is in my purse on the passenger floorboard. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now. Stone's eyes narrowed slightly as if irritated by her textbook compliance. Go ahead, slowly. Sarah retrieved the documents and handed them over. Stone held the license up to the street lamp, studying her face, then looking back down at the plastic card. Sarah Reeves, he read aloud, dragging out the syllables. He looked past her again, examining the dashboard. Nice car. Brand new. You folks live around here. The question wasn't a casual attempt at small talk. It was an interrogation. Crestview Hills was an exclusive zip code, overwhelmingly white and notoriously protective of its borders. No, officer. We live in the city, Sarah answered politely. We were just having dinner at the steakhouse on the boulevard. We're heading home now. Stone smirked a patronizing curve of his lips. The steakhouse. Right. Long way to come just for a steak. Whose vehicle is this? Jackson stiffened in the passenger seat. Sarah felt the shift in her son's posture and shot him a warning glance. Stay quiet. It's my vehicle, officer. I purchased it 3 days ago, Sarah said, keeping her tone completely neutral. Was I speeding? I'm not sure why I was pulled over. Stone leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and peppermint. Your vehicle matched the description of one involved in some recent burglaries in this neighborhood. A lot of residents have been complaining about suspicious individuals driving through late at night. Sarah stared at him. A brand new SUV with dealer tags matches a burglary vehicle. Burglars don't usually drive beaters around here, Mom. They try to blend in. Stone retorted, his tone hardening. He shifted his attention to Jackson. The teenager was glaring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. What about you, son? Stone asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Got some ID? Jackson looked at the officer. I'm 16. I don't have my driver's license yet. I didn't ask if you could drive. I asked for ID. You got a school ID, state? ID. Anything that proves you are who you say you are. He's a minor officer, Sarah interjected, her maternal instincts flaring. He doesn't need to provide identification. We haven't committed a crime. Officer Stone's hand dropped fully onto the butt of his holster. The leather creaked loudly in the quiet night. I'm conducting a lawful investigation into neighborhood burglaries, ma'am. Now, when I ask a passenger for identification, I expect to see it. Otherwise, I might start thinking he's got warrants, or maybe he's hiding something. I'm not hiding anything. Jackson snapped, his teenage pride momentarily overriding his mother's warnings. We were just going home. Stone's eyes flashed with a sudden dark intensity. What's your tone with me, boy? You think because you're sitting in a fancy car, you can talk back to a police officer? Jackson, please just be quiet. Sarah pleaded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked back at Stone. Officer, please. We have done nothing wrong. My son is just tired. Let me step out of the car and we can clear this up. You stay exactly where you are, Stone commanded, pointing a thick finger in her face. In fact, I think I need to have a little chat with the young man outside the vehicle. Passenger, step out of the car. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized Sarah's chest. The traffic stop had just shifted from an uncomfortable case of racial profiling to an immediate physical threat against her child. Officer number. He is 16 years old. Sarah protested, her voice rising in pitch. He is a minor. You cannot pull him out of the car without cause. I gave him a lawful order. Stone barked, his demeanor entirely hostile now. He stepped away from the driver's side and began walking around the front of the SUV toward the passenger door. He is being uncooperative. That gives me probable cause to detain him for officer safety. In the back seat, Maya began to cry, her small shoulders shaking as the tension in the air became too much for her to process. Mommy, what's happening? Why is he mad? It's okay, Maya. It's okay. Sarah lied, unbuckling her own seatbelt. Jackson was frozen. The envelope from the STEM Academy had fallen to the floorboard forgotten. He looked at his mother, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and absolute terror. He had seen the news. He knew the statistics. He knew exactly what could happen when a young black man was pulled out of a car on a dark road by an aggressive cop. The passenger door was violently yanked open. Stone stood there filling the frame. "Out of the car, now," Stone ordered. "I didn't do anything," Jackson said, his voice cracking slightly. Stone didn't wait for compliance. He reached in, grabbing Jackson by the fabric of his jacket, and hauled the teenager out of the seat. Jackson stumbled, his sneakers scraping against the asphalt, as he was shoved roughly against the side of the SUV. The impact rattled the windows. "Hey, don't touch him!" Sarah screamed, pushing her door open and jumping out into the cool night air. "Get back in the vehicle!" Stone roared, spinning around and pointing a finger squarely at Sarah's chest. "You take one more step and I will arrest you for interfering with a police investigation, and social services will come pick up the little girl in the back." The threat hit Sarah like a physical blow. She froze on the asphalt, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Please just listen to me. He's just a kid. He's on the honor roll. He got into a robotics program tonight. He's not a criminal." "Spread your legs," Stone ordered Jackson, ignoring Sarah completely. He kicked Jackson's ankles apart, patting him down with unnecessary force. "You got any weapons on you? Any drugs?" "No." Jackson choked out, his face pressed against the cold metal of his mother's new car. "We'll see about that," Stone muttered. Finding nothing on the teenager's person, he grabbed Jackson by the back of the collar and shoved him toward the police cruiser. "Stand right there. Don't move a muscle." Stone turned back to the SUV, shining a heavy maglite flashlight into the passenger side, sweeping the beam over the glove box, the center console, and down onto the floorboards. "What are you doing?" Sarah demanded, her fear beginning to give way to a fierce, protective anger. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have my consent to search my car." "I have probable cause." Stone lied smoothly, the beam of his flashlight dancing over Jackson's fallen acceptance letter. The passenger was acting nervous and belligerent. "That gives me the right to conduct a visual sweep of the immediate area for contraband." Sarah knew he was trying to provoke them. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Jackson to run, or Sarah to attack him, giving him the justification to use the force he was so desperately itching to deploy. She took a slow, deep breath. Her mind raced, sifting through her options. She was a mother, a high school counselor, a woman who played by the rules her entire life. But none of those titles protected her here on this dark street. She needed the one person who knew exactly how to handle hostile threats. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah slipped her left hand into the pocket of her cardigan. Her fingers found her smartphone. Without pulling it out, she pressed the power button 5 times in rapid succession, the emergency SOS shortcut she had set up months ago. It was programmed to silently bypass the lock screen, dial the first person on her emergency contact list, and keep the line open. The phone vibrated once against her hip. The call had connected. On the other end of that line was Jonathan Reeves. "Please pick up John," she prayed silently. "Please." "Look at this," Stone sneered, pulling his head out of the car. "I smell marijuana. I'm going to need to tear this car apart, and since you're so combative, ma'am, I'm going to need you in handcuffs." "Marijuana!" Sarah scoffed, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Nobody in this family smokes. You are making this up." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Stone ordered, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clinking sound seemed deafening. By the cruiser, Jackson saw the handcuffs and broke. "Don't touch my mother," he yelled, taking a step toward the officer. Stone whipped around, dropping his flashlight and unholstering his taser in one fluid, practiced motion. The red laser sight painted a dot squarely on Jackson's chest. "Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here." Stone screamed, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Get on the ground. Face down, now." Maya was shrieking in the back seat, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that tore at Sarah's soul. Jackson, trembling with rage and fear, slowly lowered himself to the cold asphalt, interlacing his fingers behind his head. Sarah stood paralyzed, tears streaming down her face, her hand still shoved deep in her pocket, gripping the phone. "John," she thought, watching the red dot hover over her son's heart. "Please hear this. Please." 3 miles away, heading northbound on Interstate 75, a black, heavy-duty pickup truck carved through the night. Behind the wheel sat Master Sergeant Jonathan Reeves. He had been driving for 8 hours straight. After a grueling 9-month deployment in a hostile classified zone in the Middle East, he was finally stateside. He had debriefed at the base, turned in his field gear, and thrown his duffel bags into the back of his truck. He hadn't told Sarah or the kids he was coming home a day early. He wanted to surprise them. He wanted to walk through the front door, drop his bags, and wrap his arms around his family. John was a Green Beret, a special forces operator who had spent his adult life in the most dangerous corners of the globe. He was trained to process chaos, to read human behavior, to neutralize threats with surgical precision. But right now, he was just a husband and a father, exhausted and eager for the smell of his own home. The Bluetooth system in his truck suddenly chimed, interrupting the low hum of the country radio station. The dashboard screen flashed, "Incoming call. Sarah SOS mode." John's combat instincts, honed over 15 years, triggered instantly. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp wave of adrenaline. Sarah never used the SOS mode. They had agreed it was only for absolute life-threatening emergencies. He hit the answer button on the steering wheel. "Sarah." There was no direct reply. Instead, the cabin of his truck was instantly filled with the chaotic, horrifying audio of a nightmare unfolding. He didn't hear his wife's voice first. He heard a man screaming, "Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here. Get on the ground, face down, now." Then came the sound of a young girl crying hysterically, a sound that made John's blood turn to ice. It was Maya. "Please, he's on the ground. Don't shoot him. Please, please." That was Sarah. Her voice raw, begging in a way John had never heard before. John didn't ask questions. He didn't yell into the phone. He knew instantly that his wife couldn't speak to him, that her phone was hidden. He was a silent listener to the assault on his family. He glanced at his GPS screen, tapping the family tracking app he kept synced with Sarah's phone. A blue dot appeared on the map. Oakbridge Lane, Crestview Hills. It was less than 3 miles from his current location. John's foot slammed the accelerator to the floor. The heavy V8 engine of the pickup roared the truck, surging forward and hitting 90 miles an hour in seconds. He swerved violently across 2 lanes of traffic, taking the Crestview Hills exit without hitting the brakes, the tires shrieking as they fought for traction on the curve. Through the speakers, the nightmare continued. "You people think you can come into this neighborhood and do whatever you want?" The aggressive, gravelly voice sneered. "Keep your face on the pavement, boy. And you lady, turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're both going in." "I have done nothing wrong," Sarah sobbed. "I'm just trying to take my kids home." John's face was a mask of cold, terrifying focus. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In his mind, he was already running a tactical assessment of the situation. An officer was going rogue. A rogue actor with a badge, a gun, and absolute authority, terrorizing his unarmed wife and children on a dark road. John knew the statistics. He knew how quickly a bad traffic stop could turn into a tragedy. The man on the other end of the line wasn't acting like a peace officer. He was acting like a predator drunk on power. The truck blew through a red light at the intersection of Main and Oakbridge, the speedometer hovering at 80 on the suburban road. John rolled down his window, the night air whipping through the cabin as he strained to see ahead. 1/2 mile down the road he saw them, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the trees. Over the phone, John heard the heavy clinking of metal handcuffs. "Stop resisting!" the cop barked. "I'm not resisting! You're hurting my shoulder!" Jackson cried out. John's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "Hold on, Jack. Dad's here." John didn't slow down to a crawl. He didn't pull up politely behind the cruiser. He drove his massive black pickup truck straight toward the scene, hitting the brakes hard at the last second. The truck screeched to a halt, the tires smoking, angling aggressively to block the street, and bathed the entire scene in the blinding glare of his high beams. The sudden arrival of the massive truck startled Officer Stone. He dropped Jackson's arms, spinning around and raising his taser toward the blinding headlights, his other hand hovering over his sidearm. "Hey, back the vehicle up, this is a police scene," Stone bellowed, trying to sound authoritative, but John could hear the sudden spike of uncertainty in the man's voice. Sarah gasped, shielding her eyes from the headlights. Jackson looked up from the pavement. John killed the engine. He didn't bother turning off the headlights. He pushed the heavy door of his truck open and stepped out into the light. He was still wearing his combat boots and his olive-drab tactical pants. A tight, black-fitted t-shirt stretched across his broad chest, revealing the thick, heavily muscled arms forged by years of carrying heavy rucksacks and pulling himself over walls. His posture was completely different from the panicked civilians Stone was used to bullying. John didn't cower. He didn't raise his hands in fear. He walked with the terrifying, predatory stillness of a man who had survived firefights in the Korengal Valley. "I said stay back," Stone yelled, drawing his service weapon, now the heavy Glock pointing directly at John. "Show me your hands." John stopped exactly 10 feet from the officer. He didn't look at the gun. He looked straight into Stone's eyes. "Take your hand off your weapon," John said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was low, quiet, and carried a frequency of absolute lethal authority that made the hairs on the back of Stone's neck stand up. "And step away from my family. John!" Sarah screamed, bursting into fresh tears, this time of overwhelming relief. "Dad!" Jackson scrambled to his knees. Stone looked wildly between the massive man in front of him and the family he had been tormenting. The power dynamic had violently shifted. Stone was used to fear. He thrived on it. But looking at the cold, dead-eyed stare of the man standing before him, Stone realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that this man wasn't afraid of his badge, and he certainly wasn't afraid of his gun. They are subjects in a criminal investigation." Stone stammered, trying to regain his footing, though the Glock in his hand trembled slightly. "You need to back off, or I will drop you." John took one slow, deliberate step forward. The air around him seemed to crackle with violent intent. "You pulled over a mother and her children," John said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like rocks grinding together. "You forced a 16-year-old boy onto the pavement at gunpoint. You threatened to have child services take my 8-year-old daughter." John took another step, closing the distance. Stone instinctively took a step back, his boots scuffing the asphalt. "My name is Master Sergeant Jonathan Reeves, United States Army Special Forces." John stated, his eyes boring holes into the terrified cop. "I have spent the last 9 months hunting actual predators in a war zone. I suggest you holster that weapon right now before I show you the difference between a man who hides behind a badge and a man who actually knows how to fight." The silence on the road was absolute, save for the low hum of the police cruiser's engine and the distant rhythmic ticking of John's overheated truck cooling in the night air. Officer Bradley Stone stood frozen, the Glock 19 in his hand, feeling heavier by the second. The man standing 10 feet away from him hadn't yelled. He hadn't made a sudden aggressive lunge. But the sheer gravitational pull of John's presence, the predatory stillness of a Tier 1 military operator, was suffocating. Stone's mind, accustomed to the easy submission of frightened suburbanites, was short-circuiting. "I am giving you a lawful order," Stone yelled, his voice cracking, the weapon trembling in his grip. "Get on the ground." "You're shaking, Stone," John said, reading the officer's nameplate with chilling calmness. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't blink. "Your heart rate is hovering around 150 beats per minute. You have tunnel vision. Your finger is twitching on the trigger guard. You are experiencing an adrenaline dump, and you have absolutely no control over this situation." John took another slow, deliberate step forward, putting himself directly between the barrel of the gun and his son. "Dad, please don't," Jackson whispered from the pavement, tears streaming down his face. "I've got you, Jack. Keep your head down," John replied softly, without breaking eye contact with the officer. He shifted his attention back to Stone. Right now, you are aiming a loaded firearm at an unarmed United States serviceman who has just returned from an active combat zone. Behind me is a 16-year-old high school student who weighs 140 pounds. You have no probable cause. You have no warrant. And as of 4 minutes ago, when my wife's emergency SOS app connected to my phone, this entire interaction has been recorded. Stone's eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to John. A flicker of profound doubt crossed his face. Every threat, John continued, his voice echoing in the quiet street. Every time you unholstered your taser, every time you threatened to call Child Protective Services on a terrified 8-year-old girl, it's all on a secure cloud server now. The moment you pull that trigger, you aren't just committing murder. You are guaranteeing that you will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary. Stone swallowed hard. The intoxicating rush of power he had felt minutes earlier had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Now, John commanded the authority in his voice, leaving absolutely no room for debate. You are going to slowly lower that weapon. Then you are going to use the radio on your left shoulder. You are going to call your watch commander, and you are going to ask for a supervisor to respond to this location immediately. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither man moved. The air was thick with the threat of violence. John's muscles were coiled, his eyes tracking the micro-movements of Stone's right shoulder. If the officer's finger moved to the trigger, John had already calculated the exact trajectory to close the distance, strip the weapon, and neutralize the threat before a round could clear the chamber. He didn't want to do it, but he would. Slowly, agonizingly, Stone lowered the gun. He didn't holster it, keeping it down at his side, but the immediate threat of a bullet tearing through John's chest receded. With his left hand, Stone fumbled for the mic clipped to his shoulder. Dispatch Unit 34. I have a 1033 on Oakbridge Lane. I need backup and a supervisor at my location. Copy 34. Units are en route. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the quiet night. Good, John said softly. He didn't move toward his family yet. He knew the danger wasn't over. A panicked cop was a dangerous cop, and backup was coming. John turned his head slightly, speaking over his shoulder to his wife. Sarah, look at me, John said. Sarah looked up, her face pale in the harsh glare of the headlights. She was trembling violently. I'm here, Sarah. It's over. But I need you to listen to me. John said, his tone shifting from the cold steel he used on Stone to the warm, steady anchor his wife knew so well. When the other officers arrive, there is going to be a lot of yelling. Do not move. Keep your hands where they can see them. Jack, stay exactly where you are. Do not give them a reason to panic. Okay, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. John, I'm so scared. I know, baby. I know. I love you. Just hold on. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with terrifying speed. Within 60 seconds, the street was flooded with blinding lights. 3 police cruisers aggressively blocked the intersection, tires screeching on the asphalt. Doors flew open, and 6 officers poured out weapons, drawn shouting over one another in a chaotic chorus of commands. Show me your hands. Get on the ground now. Drop the weapon. John knew exactly what they saw, a massive unidentified man in tactical gear, standing over an officer who had called a 1033 the code for an officer in immediate danger. Without hesitation, John dropped to his knees. He laced his fingers behind his head, interlocking them tightly, and stared straight ahead. He made himself the perfect textbook compliance subject. I am unarmed! John roared over the din of the sirens, his voice carrying the practiced projection of a battlefield commander. I am the father of the children in that vehicle. The officer is standing down. Do not fire. 2 officers rushed John, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders and shoving him face first onto the asphalt. John didn't resist. He went limp, letting them push his face into the rough pavement, letting them pull his arms back and click a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Dad! Jackson screamed, struggling to push himself up. Stay down, Jack! John yelled from the ground. Do not move! The chaos slowly crystallized into order as the officers secured the scene. John was pulled to his feet, handcuffed, and leaned against the hood of one of the newly arrived cruisers. Sarah was allowed to walk over to Jackson, throwing her arms around her son on the ground, weeping into his shoulder as an officer stood awkwardly nearby. A dark blue, unmarked SUV pulled up through the barricade of police cars. The doors opened and a tall, sharp-featured man with silver hair and a gold badge pinned to his belt stepped out. This was Sergeant Michael Donovan, the watch commander for the Crestview Hills precinct. Donovan took one look at the scene, the terrified mother and son clutching each other, the little girl crying in the back seat, the handcuffed man in military gear, and Officer Stone standing off to the side, looking pale and sweating profusely. "What the hell is going on here?" Donovan barked, walking straight towards Stone. "You called a 1033 Stone. I expected a shootout. I've got a crying family and a guy in handcuffs." Sergeant Stone started his voice defensive and rushed. "I conducted a lawful stop on a vehicle matching a burglary profile. The occupants were combative. The teenager refused to identify himself. The female driver attempted to exit the vehicle against orders. Then this man," he pointed a shaky finger at John, "arrived on the scene, blocked the roadway, and aggressively approached me. I had to draw my weapon to maintain control." Donovan frowned, looking over at John. He walked over, studying John's calm, completely composed face. He noted the military boots, the olive drab pants, the posture. "Who are you?" Donovan asked. "Master Sergeant Jonathan Reeves, United States Army." John replied, his voice steady and polite. "I just returned from a 9-month deployment. That is my wife, Sarah. Those are my children, Jackson and Maya. And your officer is lying to you, Sergeant." Donovan crossed his arms. "Is that right?" "Sergeant Donovan, isn't it?" John asked, reading the name tag. "I understand how this looks, but I respectfully request that you look at the floorboard of my wife's SUV. You'll find an acceptance letter to a state STEM academy for my son. We don't live in this neighborhood. My family was driving home from a celebratory dinner. Your officer initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. He escalated the situation by demanding ID from a minor passenger, dragged my son out of the car, and held him at gunpoint when my wife verbally protested an illegal search of the vehicle." Donovan's brow furrowed. He turned to Stone. "You pulled a gun on the kid. Did you search the vehicle?" Stone. "He was acting suspiciously. Sarge, I smelled marijuana." Stone blurted out. "My family doesn't smoke," John countered smoothly. "And you don't have to take my word for it. My wife's phone was on a live SOS call to my vehicle's Bluetooth system. The entire audio of the stop, including Officer Stone threatening to have Child Protective Services take my daughter because my wife stepped out of the car, is recorded." Donovan's face hardened. He was a 20-year veteran of the force. He knew good cops, and he knew bad cops. He had been reviewing Stone's increasingly aggressive field reports for months, waiting for the man to cross a line that couldn't be ignored. Looking at the terrified black family, the aggressive positioning of Stone's cruiser, and the calm, articulate green beret in handcuffs, Donovan knew exactly what had happened here. "Get these cuffs off him," Donovan snapped to the officer standing next to John. "Sarge, he rushed a police scene," the young officer protested. "I said take them off," Donovan roared. The officer quickly unlocked the cuffs. John rubbed his wrists, nodding politely to Donovan. "Thank you, Sergeant." Donovan walked over to Sarah and Jackson. He crouched down slightly to be at eye level with the teenager who was still shaking uncontrollably. "Son, you okay?" Jackson looked at the sergeant, then up at his mother, and finally over at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. He pulled me out of the car. I didn't do anything." Donovan sighed a heavy, tired sound. He stood up and turned his attention back to Stone. The anger in the watch commander's eyes was absolute. "Stone, give me your weapon and your badge," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What, Sarge, you can't be serious." He interfered. "I will not ask you a second time," Donovan interrupted, taking a step toward the disgraced officer. "You profiled a family. You escalated a routine stop into a lethal force scenario without justification. You traumatized a mother and her children. You are a liability to this badge, and as of this exact second, you are relieved of duty pending an investigation by Internal Affairs. Weapon. Badge. Now. Stone's face flushed purple with humiliation and rage. His hands shook as he unclipped his gun belt, handing it over along with the gold shield pinned to his chest. Get in the back of my vehicle, Donovan ordered. As Stone was escorted away, John finally walked over to his family. The stoic, unyielding operator vanished, replaced instantly by the father. He dropped to his knees on the asphalt, wrapping his massive arms around Sarah and Jackson, pulling them tightly against his chest. Sarah buried her face in his neck, the dam finally breaking as she sobbed uncontrollably. Jackson clung to his father's shirt, the teenage facade of toughness entirely shattered. I've got you, John whispered, burying his face in his wife's hair, tears finally welling in his own eyes. I'm right here. Nobody is going to hurt you. He stood up, keeping one arm securely around Sarah, and walked to the back seat of the SUV. He opened the door. Maya was huddled in the corner, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes wide with terror. Hey, Ladybug, John said softly, a warm, broken smile spreading across his face. Maya blinked, taking a second to process the man in the darkness. Then she launched herself out of the car and into his arms. Daddy, you came home. I came home, baby, John said, kissing the top of her head. I'm right here. Sergeant Donovan approached them slowly, holding Jackson's trampled acceptance letter in his hand. He looked at the family, the weight of his uniform feeling heavier than it ever had before. Mr. Reeves. Mrs. Reeves, Donovan said gently. I cannot apologize enough for what happened here tonight. It does not reflect the values of this department. I am personally ensuring that Officer Stone is investigated to the fullest extent of the law. John looked over his daughter's shoulder at the sergeant. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but it was controlled. An apology doesn't erase what my son felt when a gun was pointed at his chest. Sergeant, John said, his voice quiet but firm. My family survived tonight because I happened to be 3 miles away and because I know how to navigate an armed conflict. But what happens to the next kid, the one whose dad isn't a Green Beret? Donovan looked down at the asphalt, unable to meet John's gaze. I understand, and you have my word, I will be the first one to testify against him. He handed the crumpled STEM Academy envelope back to Jackson. Congratulations on the robotics program, son. You earned it. John nodded. We're going home now, Sergeant. I'll be at the precinct tomorrow at 0800 hours with my lawyer to file a formal complaint, provide the audio recordings, and speak with the State Bureau of Investigation. We'll be ready for you, Master Sergeant, Donovan said respectfully, stepping back to clear their path. Have a safe drive home. John loaded his family into his massive pickup truck, leaving the new SUV safely locked on the shoulder for the police to tow back to their house. As he pulled away from the flashing lights and the shattered remnants of the night, Sarah reached across the center console, weaving her fingers tightly through his. You're really home, she whispered. John looked at his wife, then glanced in the rearview mirror at his 2 children, safe in the back seat. The war he had been fighting overseas was over, but as he drove through the dark, quiet streets of his own country, he knew a different kind of battle had just begun. Yeah, John said softly, his grip tightening on her hand. I'm home, and I'm not going anywhere. The sun rose over the city, painting the morning sky in bruised hues of purple and gold, but the shadows of the previous night lingered heavy in the Reeves household. Nobody had slept. Sarah had spent the dawn sitting on the edge of Jackson's bed, her hand resting on her son's back as he stared blankly at the wall. John had spent the hours at the kitchen table, the glowing screen of his laptop illuminating his hardened features as he organized the digital audio files and contacted the one man he knew could handle the impending storm. By 800 hours, John and Sarah walked through the heavy glass doors of the Crestview Hills Police Department. They were not alone. Flanking them was Benjamin Crawford, a heavyweight civil rights attorney, who had cut his teeth fighting misconduct cases alongside the ACLU. Crawford was a tall, imposing figure in a charcoal bespoke suit, carrying a leather briefcase that felt like a loaded weapon. They were ushered into a sterile, windowless conference room. Sergeant Donovan was already there, looking older and more exhausted in the harsh, fluorescent light. Beside him sat two detectives from the State Bureau of Investigation, SBY, and a man in a tight grey suit who introduced himself as the police union representative, Paul Jenkins. "Let's make this quick." Jenkins started crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair with a practiced look of bored defiance. "Officer Stone has an unblemished record. He was operating under reasonable suspicion in a high-crime area. We are prepared to argue that the minor was non-compliant, and that Master Sergeant Reeves here escalated the situation by aggressively breaching a secured perimeter." Crawford didn't sit down. He unclasped his briefcase, placing a small Bluetooth speaker in the center of the mahogany table. "An unblemished record, Mr. Jenkins." Crawford asked, his voice smooth, but laced with razor-sharp intent. "Is that what you call a history of aggressive profiling? Because my office spent the last 4 hours pulling public court dockets. Officer Stone has had 3 excessive force complaints quietly settled out of court in the last 4 years. But I suppose you were hoping we wouldn't look into that." Jenkins scowled. "Those were unsubstantiated claims. Furthermore, Officer Stone's body camera malfunctioned during the initial approach. It's a known glitch with the new Axon models. So unless you have definitive proof that my client acted outside the bounds of his constitutional authority, this is a he said, she said scenario, and the law sides with the badge." John's eyes locked onto Jenkins. The cold, predatory stillness from the night before returned to the Green Beret's posture. "There was no malfunction," John said quietly, his voice cutting through the room's tension. "He turned it off. He wanted to operate in the dark, but he forgot that a predator isn't the only thing that can listen in the dark." John nodded to Crawford. The attorney pressed a button on his tablet. The small speaker on the table crackled to life, and the sterile conference room was suddenly filled with the nightmarish reality of the traffic stop. The audio was pristine. It didn't just capture words, it captured the terror. The SBI detectives shifted uncomfortably as they heard Stone's aggressive, gravelly voice demanding Jackson step out of the car. They heard the violent scuffle of the teenager being thrown against the SUV. "Take another step, boy, and I'll drop you right here. Get on the ground, face down now." Sarah closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, as the phantom sound of her daughter's hysterical screaming filled the room. John reached out, taking his wife's hand and squeezing it firmly. When the audio finally concluded with John's arrival, the silence in the conference room was absolute and suffocating. The union representative Jenkins had turned completely pale, his previous arrogance entirely erased. He stared at the speaker as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. Sergeant Donovan looked up, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. He looked directly at the SBI detectives. "You have what you need." "We do," the lead detective affirmed, standing up and closing his notepad. He turned to John and Sarah. "Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, on behalf of the State Bureau of Investigation, I am deeply sorry for what your family endured. We are taking over this case immediately. We will be pursuing felony charges for aggravated assault under colour of law, false imprisonment, and official oppression." Jenkins stood up quickly, raising his hands. "Now, hold on. Let's not rush to—" "Save it, Paul!" Donovan interrupted, his voice dripping with disgust. "Stone is done. And if the union tries to drag this family through the mud to protect a criminal in a uniform, I will personally take the stand and testify to everything I saw when I arrived on that scene. You tell Stone to get a good lawyer. He's going to need it. The wheels of justice are notoriously slow, but when greased by indisputable digital evidence, public outrage, and the unyielding pressure of a decorated Green Beret, they can turn with staggering speed. Within 48 hours, the audio recording had been strategically leaked to the press by Crawford's office. It became a national firestorm. The contrast between the terrified innocence of the Reeves family and the tyrannical aggression of Officer Stone struck a collective nerve across the country. The twists didn't stop at the indictment. During the discovery phase of the trial, an internal whistleblower at the Crestview Hills precinct stepped forward. Inspired by Sergeant Donovan's uncompromising stance, the whistleblower leaked a trove of emails proving that the precinct's former leadership had actively encouraged the targeting of minorities driving through the affluent suburb. The revelation triggered a massive federal civil rights probe by the Department of Justice. The precinct was entirely overhauled. 10 months later, John and Sarah sat in the polished wooden pews of the federal courthouse. They watched as Bradley Stone, now stripped of his uniform and wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, stood before the judge. He looked small, his previous swagger replaced by the hollow, sunken realization of his own ruin. The judge didn't mince words. Citing the severe breach of public trust and the psychological trauma inflicted upon a minor, the judge sentenced Stone to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. As the gavel fell, an echoing crack that finalized the nightmare, John exhaled a breath it felt like he had been holding for nearly a year. He looked at Sarah, a quiet, tearful smile passing between them. They had won. They had protected their pack, but true victory wasn't found in a courtroom. It was found in the resilience of their home. Summer arrived with the blistering heat and vibrant energy characteristic of a new beginning. On a bright Saturday morning, John pulled his massive black pickup truck up to the sprawling, ivy-covered campus of the State University STEM Institute. In the passenger seat, Jackson unbuckled his seatbelt. He had grown taller over the past year, his shoulders broader, his posture straighter. The trauma of that night had scarred him, but with the support of his family and intensive therapy, the scar had become a testament to his survival rather than a symbol of his defeat. Jackson reached into the back seat, grabbing a complex, heavily modified robotic arm he had spent the last 3 weeks building in their garage. "You got everything, Jack?" John asked, putting the truck in park. "Yeah, Dad, I got it," Jackson said, smiling as he adjusted his grip on the machinery. John reached over, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "I am so incredibly proud of you. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't belong in these rooms. You earned this." Jackson nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "I know. Thanks, Dad." John watched as his son walked across the sunlit campus, joining a group of diverse, brilliant young minds who were eagerly examining his robotic creation. Jackson was exactly where he was supposed to be. John smiled, shifting the truck into drive. He had officially transitioned out of active duty, taking a position as a tactical consultant and instructor for law enforcement de-escalation training. He was using his combat experience not to wage war, but to teach officers how to manage their fear, how to read real threats, and how to protect the communities they were sworn to serve. He drove back toward the city, the radio playing softly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The darkness of that isolated suburban road was finally behind them. The Reeves family had faced the absolute worst of society, a predator cloaked in authority, and they had not broken. They had stood their ground, they had fought back with the truth, and they had walked out into the light, stronger, united, and completely unbreakable. The Reeves family's harrowing journey is a powerful reminder that justice isn't just handed to us. Sometimes it must be demanded by those brave enough to stand in the light and expose the dark. It shows us the unbreakable bond of family, the crucial importance of accountability, and the incredible courage it takes to heal after trauma. If this real-life drama moved you and you believe in standing up against injustice, please hit that like button. Share this story with your friends and family to spread awareness, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of resilience, truth, and triumph.